All right, so in case you aren't following me on Instagram, which is at the Film Punch, by the way, I posted a story on Christmas Eve saying instead of watching a Christmas movie, I chose to watch 2014's Whiplash, which is the movie I will be reviewing for you today. It's written and directed by Damien Chazelle, stars Miles Teller as Andrew Neiman and J.K. Simmons as Fletcher, and is about a promising young drummer who enrolls at a cutthroat music conservatory where his dreams of greatness are mentored by an instructor who will stop at nothing to realize his potential. And yeah, great cast in here. Miles Teller, fantastic. A lot of people don't really know, didn't really know a whole lot about Miles Teller, didn't really see him a whole lot, and didn't really just I don't know. People weren't on the Miles Teller train until recently with Top Gun Maverick, of course, where he played, I wanted to say Goose, but no, he's Goose's son, Rooster. I think he was fantastic in in that movie, but I also think he was fantastic in this movie. And I mean, this is the introduction to Miles Teller for me personally. I watched this in maybe like 2015, I believe, somewhere around that time frame. So I was around 14 to 15 years old, which is this type of movie. And I'm not trying to pat myself on the back, toot my own horn or whatever, but this typically isn't the type of movie that a 15 to 16 year old, or not 15 to 16, but a 14 to 15-year old would be interested in. And even at that time, this is a movie that I instantly fell in love with and knew would be on my top 10 for years to come, and it still is. And I mean, it's not just because of the two great actors in here, Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons, of course, but it's also the writing, it's the camera work, it's the cinematography, camera work, same thing. It's just the directing in general. I think there are so many things that this movie does right, and I have very few complaints. Only complaint I will say right off the bat is there's one story beat in here that feels a little unnecessary and a little too on the nose because of something that happens previously that's kind of mentioned. And if you've seen the movie, maybe you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen it, hopefully that doesn't give anything away if you do go and watch this movie, which I highly recommend doing. But yeah, it's actually based on a 2013 short of the same name where J.K. Simmons still played Fletcher, but Miles Teller was played by somebody else. And forgive me, I didn't look up the name before doing this review, but I know his last name is Simmons, and I was like, huh, is he related to J.K. Simmons? He's not. But I do recognize the actor. I can't remember his first name, but he was in Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So you might be able to find him from there. But yeah, that's who played Andrew Neiman in the short, and then they made this movie, and Miles Teller became Andrew Neiman. There were also a couple people in there that remained in the film, but they were more kind of side characters, so I just didn't mention them here. Apologies. But yeah, also in the cast we got Paul Reiser as Jim Neiman, plays the father to Andrew, of course. And Paul Reiser is somebody. Isn't he in? I want to say he's in Goonies, but I could be wrong. I think I'm mixing him up with the other guy on Stranger Things, which I can't remember his name at the moment. But yeah, Paul Reiser, I believe, is on Stranger Things. Can't remember his character's name, but he's one of the doctors that works alongside Dr. Brenner and whatnot. You know who I'm talking about if you watch the show. But yeah, he's great in here for the little bit that he's in it and has some really great moments. He is a fantastic actor, so it's just great to see him in here. Melissa Benoist as Nicole, who some of you might recognize as Supergirl on the CW. This is the first time I saw her before Supergirl, and I don't know. I mean, what she's given in here is fine, but I don't think the writing is necessarily tuned to really give her anything to do other than just kind of be a love interest for a little bit there. Hopefully that's not a spoiler saying anything, but yeah, I mean, it's just interesting to see Andrew Neiman. He's a drummer who aspiring wants to be like one of the greatest drummers of all time, and he works really hard. He pushes himself. He is definitely, he definitely kind of has some mental issues when it comes to, and people could kind of look at this different ways, but I feel like he kind of has a kind of OCD type of thing when it comes to drumming, which is something I can relate to, having OCD. Mine at times can be extreme more than others. I can have flare-ups where I just want to clean and just have things be perfect, and it kind of seems like Andrew Neiman has a lot of that in here, as well as J.K. Simmons' character Fletcher, who is the teacher in here. They have a lot of similarities, and that's why those two characters kind of butt heads in this movie. And it's just so fascinating to see these two characters who have two different personalities but similar traits at the same time, and just seeing how they kind of connect. Even though at times they can both be completely awful, you're like, I can kind of see where both of these people are coming from. I can kind of see why they're doing what they're doing. It's just what they're doing might not be right, but it feels right in their heads. And, I've been talking about Miles Teller. I should talk about J.K. Simmons, but the last thing I'll say about Miles Teller before I get into J.K. Simmons' character, which, is the character everybody wants to hear me talk about. Yeah, Miles Teller did know how to play drums before going into this movie. He has been playing drums since 15, I believe. I have it written down. Yeah, he's been drumming since 15 and took additional lessons for 4 hours a day, 3 days a week for this film. I'm not sure what that time frame was, but yeah, I mean, in this movie, he absolutely kills it. You could buy him as, honestly, one of the greatest drummers of all time. He has moments in here that are just incredibly impressive. And meanwhile, you have him doing these impressive things. You also have J.K. Simmons as Fletcher just screaming in his face, telling him to play faster, telling him to play better, and it's just you kind of get to see him right up until his breaking point, and you get to see a little bit of that breaking point, and then it's kind of an underdog story at times. I'm really trying not to give anything away, so if I'm talking kind of weird right now, it's just because I'm like really trying to dance around stuff, because sure, this might not be a Marvel movie, it might not have super huge spoilers or anything like that, it might not be a super complex movie with a lot of layer. Well, it does have a lot of layers, it does have some complexities for sure, but you know what I mean. It's not one of these big blockbuster movies that if you spoil one thing, people will freak out and bash you online. But this is one of those movies. Since it is one of my favorite movies of all time, I really do want people to go watch it. So it's really hard to actually review this film, which doesn't make for the greatest review, I know, but you know again, it's just one of those movies I feel like you guys really need to go watch. I think you would very much appreciate it if you watched it. If it is a movie that you haven't checked out, if I haven't said it enough already, definitely go watch this film. I'm not sure exactly where you can find it. Maybe HBO Max, maybe Hulu. I'm not completely sure. Maybe on Netflix. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But you can probably look that up. I do have it on my Vudu personally, so that's why I don't know off the top of my head. But yeah, I mean, Miles Teller is fantastic in this film, but the real standout for a lot of people in this film is J.K. Simmons, and that is because he's essentially Gordon Ramsay if he became a music teacher, but like times 20. He's throwing cymbals at people's heads. He's throwing chairs. He's slapping people. He's yelling at them. He's saying some just horrible shit. And I'm gonna say like one of these words tops. Faggot. Like that's a word he says quite a bit in this movie. And if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, I mean, maybe don't watch it. But at the same time, it's very important for his character to belittle people like that. And literally, when he's saying stuff like that, you don't know for sure, because you don't always know the character that he's saying these things to. And when he's talking to Miles Teller's character, he says things that are kind of directed towards his character in general, or specifically, yeah, you know what I mean. But he says things that are targeted towards him, saying things to make him feel bad about his life, his situation, and whatnot, taking his own history and using it against him to essentially try to make him better. But from the outside looking in, it's just a man screaming at somebody, saying just the worst stuff nobody should ever say to anybody. But it seems targeted, and when he says stuff like that to other people that you don't really get to know throughout the movie, you wonder how much of that is true, and like how hard he's actually going with these people, which, oh, I don't even want to think about that aspect. But at the same time, J.K. Simmons plays it so perfectly to the point where, I mean, you gotta hate him, but at the same time, you freaking love him at the same time, just because the dialogue is offensive and inappropriate, but it's also just completely hilarious if you're willing to take that kind of joke, and maybe it's not quite a joke. Maybe there's some elements of it to be taken seriously. But at the same time, it's meant to be there to like shock you and be funny for the most part when it comes to a lot of that stuff. And then once it starts to get more serious, chairs start getting thrown, people start getting slapped. That's when the laughs start to die down a little bit. But for the most part, J.K. Simmons, he is so fun to watch. I mean, he's like J. Jonah Jameson essentially on crack in this film. Fantastic. Um, but yeah, I mean, as for everybody else in the film, aside from Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons, they get a little, I guess, to do. Melissa Benoist is the one that, out of the people I mentioned, probably gets the least to do. But Paul Reiser, I think he has some great moments as Andrew's dad, and yeah, has some interesting family moments and family dynamics there. But yeah, it's easy to see Fletcher simply as a sociopathic music teacher, obsessed with perfection, but there's subtle things that they do to peel back the layers with him underneath to show that he is also human and that, you know, there are elements to him that are kind of likable in at times, like I was kind of saying before, and not quite with making it just so funny that he's being so offensive, but like times where he is a genuine human being, times where he comes down to that human level, and you get to see kind of the layers underneath, and see that he's more than just Gordon Ramsay essentially. You know what I mean? He's more than just J. Jonah Jameson. He's more than just that screaming music teacher. He has layers to him, and I appreciate that because this movie easily could have just made him the bad guy, and that would be that. But they decided to actually give him depth to a point where you can kind of understand where he's coming from, and by the end, you don't necessarily hate either people, even though they both did horrible things. Maybe one more than the other, but still. Yeah, and the ending, by the way, is one thing I want to mention. The ending of this film, I won't spoil it, obviously, but it's a ending that I've watched on YouTube so many times. I've probably watched it hundreds of times. It's probably my favorite ending to any film ever. Probably my favorite movie scene ever, to be honest. Which, by the way, top 10 favorite movie scenes would be an interesting, video, to do. I might do that at some point, but that would take a lot of time to put that together. So we shall see how long that would take. But speaking of which, top 10 favorite and least favorite of 2022 lists coming soon. Not sure exactly which days, but they will be back to back, one after the other. Not sure if I'm going to post the least favorite or favorite first. Probably the favorite first, to be honest, because that's the one that everybody wants to see. But yeah, back to this movie. Not going to talk about it for too much longer because, again, I don't want to give a whole lot away. But yeah, I mean, Miles Teller in this film, you can see where him and Fletcher have their differences and similarities. As I said before, they have their kind of narcissism, they have their OCDs about stuff, and they both are striving for greatness. And the reason why they butt heads and the reason why, um, I don't know. I'm just gonna leave it there because if I say anything more, I feel like I'm gonna kind of get myself into a hole and not be able to get myself out in terms of saying a little too much about the movie. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's pretty much all I have to say about this film. One story beat in this film. Yeah, I'm just making sure I don't have any other notes I should read. Oh, one more thing. Oh, can't believe I almost forgot to talk about the music in this film. So I'm not a huge fan of jazz music personally. With films over the last few handful of years or so, with this film, obviously, and then films like La La Land, Soul, um, those movies have gotten me more into jazz as a music form. Is it something I actively listen to? Not really. If I do actively listen to any jazz music, it's literally just the Whiplash soundtrack, which, by the way, there's a 5-minute drum solo in this movie. If I didn't give you reason enough to watch this, I think that should give you plenty of reason to watch it now. But yeah, jazz is something I'm not a huge fan of, but in this movie specifically, jazz is in the music of this film is honestly a character in and of itself. Um, so yeah, I mean, when the music can be part of the story, that's when you really capture my attention with films like Baby Driver. I think Baby Driver, the music in there really kind of told the story and drove the narrative. And this film, even though there's no words to it, it still does what it needs to do. It accomplishes what it needs to do extremely well. So, you know, I mean, a lot of this in here is actually music that existed before, I believe. Don't quote me on that. Like Caravan and Whiplash, I believe those are songs that existed before this movie. Um, but yeah, I mean, like the way they use it to their advantage, and the way they wrap a scene around one whole song. It engages you with not only the music in general, but like the drums and the saxophones. It engages you. I mean, the drums more than anything else, because obviously you're focusing on Miles Teller drumming, but you know, it's almost like you're just circling the drums. You're just kind of watching from up above, just seeing a concert, I guess. I don't know. That's the best way I can describe it. But um yeah, I'm starting to get to the point where I can't really describe things very well. It's starting to get late. I apologize. Kind of a weird review because I'm dancing around, not really saying too much about the movie. But, you know, I'm going to reiterate this for the very last time. Please, please, please do yourself a favor and watch 2014's Whiplash. But have you seen 2014's Whiplash? What did you think about it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Are you in the middle? I love this movie. I would definitely give this a premium ticket, premium subscription, highest price. You know, A plus 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 plus. One of my favorite movies of all time, as I said before. And have you not watched this film? Are you planning on watching it anytime soon, or really planning on watching it at all? Why or why not? I would love to hear from you. Really, any comments? I would love to hear from you. I respond to pretty much every comment. So, yeah, anything and everything down below. But yeah, leave a like on the video, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and I will see you in the next one.